I pressed send and watched my phone screen dim. My surgery's on the 15th, just need a ride home. That was all. No long explanation, no pleading. At 74, I had learned that asking for help was already an act of vulnerability. I expected at least a polite reply, maybe a brief, "Of course we'll be there." 2 hours passed. Nothing. When the chime finally came, I opened the group chat expecting reassurance. Instead, Celine's name lit the screen. "It's none of my business." I stared at those 5 words until they blurred. The screen's cold glow felt almost louder than the sentence itself. No questions, no concern, not even a curt hope it goes well. Just a dismissal. I told myself to set the phone down, to breathe, to let the anger cool before it settled in my bones. I stood at the kitchen counter, kettle hissing, when another notification buzzed. Same sender, different tone. "Once she's too weak to meddle, we'll sell that property and get the lake house. Corbin's on board." For a moment I thought my vision had betrayed me. Then I noticed no one else in the group chat had received it. This wasn't meant for me. This was meant for someone she trusted enough to plot with. My pulse thudded in my ears. That property. 2 words so casual, as if my life were just a line item on their vision board. I gripped the counter until my knuckles ached, running through every piece of land, every title still in my name. The kettle whistled louder. I shut it off, poured water over the tea bag, and let the steam fog my glasses. The scent of chamomile used to calm me. Tonight, it was wasted. My mind chased possibilities, memories, old promises Corbin had made when he still looked at me with gratitude instead of impatience. They thought I was too weak already. That surgery would make me easier to sideline, to erase. I sipped slowly, feeling the tea's warmth spread through me, not comfort, but clarity. Whatever Celine meant, I needed to know. And once I did, I would decide how to answer. By the time my cup was empty, the first outline of that answer had begun to take shape. The kitchen felt smaller that evening, though nothing in it had changed. The oak table, worn smooth by decades of elbows and coffee cups, sat beneath the same brass light fixture. The diplomas, Corbin's law degree and MBA, still hung proudly on the wall above the sideboard. My late husband's smile stared back from the photo in the corner. Yet the air seemed thinner, cooler, as if those framed successes had stolen the warmth I used to feel here. I remembered the day Corbin graduated. The applause, the handshake with the dean, the way he sought me out in the crowd, eyes bright with gratitude. He never knew the full story that the tuition payment clearing just in time had cost me my wedding ring. I told him it was in for repair when he noticed its absence. By the time he was walking across that stage, it had already been melted into someone else's memory. Then came Celine's networking trips. I was happy to help in the beginning, genuinely. Their 2 boys filled the house with life again. Legos on the floor, cartoons humming in the background, the scent of grilled cheese for lunch. But a week turned into 3, 3 into 6. I became the default childcare, quietly rearranging my own commitments so she could secure clients. No one asked if it was too much. No one asked at all. I looked now at the high shelf where the baby bottles once sat, replaced by a neat row of cookbooks I rarely opened. The boys were teenagers, busy with their own lives. Celine's business had grown her office decorated in gold and glass. And yet the woman who once left me lists of emergency numbers now couldn't be bothered to answer a plea for a ride home from surgery. The steam from my second cup of tea curled toward the ceiling. Love had been my currency for decades, freely given, no repayment expected. But lately, it seemed they'd stopped even pretending to value it. The debts weren't about money. They were about respect, about recognition. I set the cup down and reached for my phone. If they wouldn't remember on their own, I might have to remind them. 2 days later, I drove to the Pearl District with a folder of insurance documents Celine needed for her boutique lease renewal. The street was lined with polished storefronts, each one competing to look more exclusive than the next. Celine's shop fit right in wide glass windows, fresh floral arrangements at the entrance, the faint scent of expensive candles drifting into the sidewalk. I stepped inside, the soft chime of the door barely audible over the low hum of conversation. Celine stood near a display of imported linens, a client perched on the edge of a velvet chair. I lingered by a table of crystal stemware, waiting for a break in her conversation so I could hand over the papers. "Oh, I basically keep Maristella afloat," Celine was saying, her voice carrying just enough to be overheard. "She's too proud to admit it, of course. But between helping with bills and all the favors we do, she's comfortable." The client murmured something sympathetic, and Selena gave a small, knowing laugh. The heat rose in my chest, but I kept my back-turned eyes on a silver tray I suddenly had no interest in. I didn't trust myself to speak, not yet. I slid the folder onto the counter near the register without interrupting, quietly, letting the weight of her words settle into place. Outside, the winter sun was bright enough to make me squint. I walked back to my car with deliberate calm, the way you move when you know you're being watched, even if you're not. The hurt was sharp, but underneath it was something steadier, colder. She was rewriting the story, casting herself as the benevolent supporter, and me as the grateful dependent. And she was doing it with confidence in public, without a shred of hesitation. That kind of lie wasn't careless. It was calculated. I started the car, the folder no longer in my possession, but its absence replaced with something far more valuable proof. If Celine was willing to distort the truth so boldly, then I needed to start thinking less like a mother-in-law and more like someone building a case. Armando's office sat high in the Weston Center, the glass walls giving a sweeping view of the city. The morning light glinted off his desk as I laid my phone between us, the missent text glowing on the screen. He read it twice, his brows knitting tighter with each pass. "That's bold," he said, finally leaning back in his chair. "And careless. But Maristella, this gives you more leverage than you think." I raised an eyebrow. "Leverage." He swiveled to a file cabinet, rifling through a drawer, before producing a slim folder. "You've owned the building where Celine's boutique sits since 1987. Bought it with your father's inheritance." I filed the deed myself. For a moment, the words didn't land. "Owned?" I repeated slowly. "You mean it's yours," he said, tapping the folder. "Always has been. You've been leasing it out under a long-term agreement. Corbin handled the paperwork when Celine took over the space, but your name never came off the title." A warmth spread through me, not of comfort, but of clarity. All this time she'd been strutting through that shop as if it were her empire, speaking about me, as though I were some fragile relic she was keeping alive, and she'd been doing it under my roof. Armando slid another document across the desk. Clause 12. Breach of transparency. If the tenant misrepresents financial or operational matters to the property owner, the lease can be terminated with 30 days' notice. I read the clause twice, my pulse steadying into something cold and deliberate. So I said, meeting his eyes if I wanted her out, "You could do it legally." And cleanly, he finished. I leaned back, letting the reality settle. All these years I had let her speak to me as if I owed her something. I had let her dictate the terms of our interactions, shrinking myself and my own family. But here was the truth, in black and white. She was the tenant, and I was the landlord. And for the first time in years, I realized I'd been holding the keys all along. Raina chose a table by the window at the Riverside Cafe, the kind of spot where you could watch the slow current and still keep your voice low enough for privacy. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "That Cabo trip Celine's bragging about," she began, stirring her coffee. "It's not an industry expo. There's no conference, no trade show. Just a string of beachside parties for people who want to look important." I felt my jaw tighten. And the money straight from the boutique's profits, she said, including the rent portion that should have gone toward your building's maintenance. I know because my niece does the books for one of her suppliers. She saw the transfers herself. The bitterness in my coffee was nothing compared to the taste rising in my throat. It wasn't just arrogance now, it was theft, dressed up in stilettos and sun hats. Raina leaned in. That's not all. Celine's been asking around about buying an old widow's building on the cheap. Sound familiar? A slow, deliberate calm settled over me. She's making plans, I said. She's probing the market, Raina corrected. Trying to figure out who'd buy from her fast if she got control. The way I hear it, she thinks you'll either sell to Corbin for next to nothing or just sign it over eventually. I sipped my coffee to keep my hands from trembling. The picture was becoming sharper with every conversation. The dismissive messages, the public lies the sham trip paid for with my property's earnings. She wasn't just underestimating me, she was betting against me entirely. Raina touched my wrist. You've got the law on your side, Maristella. But timing, that's where the power really is. I looked out at the water, its surface catching the last of the afternoon sun. Timing, yes. Celine was still in Cabo, still thinking she had weeks before I noticed anything worth reacting to. I could act now, but if I waited just long enough, my move could take more than her lies. It could take the foundation she stood on. Armando spread the papers across his desk like a dealer laying down a winning hand. Late rent slips, he said, tapping the first stack. 3 in the last 18 months. Not enough to evict on their own, but enough to establish a pattern. He slid over the next pile. Underreported revenue. I cross-checked her public client lists with declared income. The math doesn't match. My eyes moved to the third stack photos of the boutique's back room mid-renovation walls, half-painted a delivery of imported fixtures stacked by the door. No permits filed? I asked. None, Armando confirmed. And according to the lease, unapproved structural or design changes are a direct breach. I picked up the lease, my fingers tracing the underlined clause, 12 termination permitted within 30 days of documented violation. Proof. That was what I'd been collecting without even realizing it. Celine's own behavior giving me the legal grounds I needed. Armando leaned back. You could serve notice now. Have her out by spring. I thought about it, then shook my head slowly. No, if I do it now, she has time to scramble, maybe spin the story in her favor. I want her unprepared. He gave me a knowing look. So when I could almost see it, Celine lounging in a resort chair, drink in hand, still believing she'd come home to the same empire. While they're still in Cabo, I said. They'll open their email to a termination notice and 30 days to vacate. Armando nodded, already stacking the evidence into a neat, damning file. Then we'll set the clock to start the moment they think they're on top of the world. I left his office with the folder in my bag, its weight both literal and symbolic. Each page was a reminder that I wasn't powerless, that the narrative Celine had built could collapse as quickly as it had been constructed. Now all that remained was patience. And when the moment came, I wouldn't just be closing a door, I'd be locking it behind them. San Antonio Memorial was all white corridors and sterile echoes, the kind of place where time felt suspended. The operating room lights were colder than I remembered from my last hospital stay, and the steady beeping of monitors followed me even as the anesthesia began to blur the edges of my vision. There were no familiar hands squeezing mine, no voices in the waiting room promising to be there when I woke. When I opened my eyes again, it was to the soft click of the recovery room door and the professional smile of the nurse I'd hired for the next 48 hours. Her name was Clara, and she moved with the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen hundreds of patients through worse. "Let's keep you comfortable," she said, adjusting the blankets and checking my IV. The pain was sharper than I'd braced for, a deep, raw throb that made even small movements feel like a negotiation. Clara's presence was steadying, but it was her professionalism, not affection, that wrapped around me. That absence, the one where family should have been, was more cutting than the stitches in my neck. In the quiet hours of the night, when the hospital floor went still, I listened to the soft hiss of the oxygen and thought about the tumor they'd taken out. The surgeon had called it clean removal, but I knew there was more in my life that needed excising. Some growths weren't made of cells, they were made of entitlement lies and the slow corrosion of trust. By the time Clara wheeled me to the curb 2 days later, the winter air felt different against my skin. The surgery had drained me physically, but it had clarified something that had been clouded for years. I wasn't just going to heal my body. I was going to cut out every part of my life that treated me like I was dispensable. And some of those incisions were going to be deeper than anything the surgeon had done. The days after surgery moved slowly, each one measured in doses of pain medication and the rhythm of my own breathing. I kept to the recliner in my front room, sunlight filtering through lace curtains, the television murmuring low just to fill the space. It was late afternoon when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, expecting a reminder for medication or a check-in from Clara. Instead, it was from Celine. "When we get back, start moving on that block purchase. The old lady won't be around forever." The words sat there like a slap. No name, no context, just casual cruelty dropped into the wrong thread. The kind of slip you only make when you've said it too many times before. I didn't waste time feeling the sting. I reached for my address book and found Armando's number. He picked up on the second ring. "Change of plan," I told him. My voice was steady, almost calm. "We're not just ending her lease. I want the building in new hands before she even steps off the plane." He didn't ask why. Armando had known me long enough to hear the weight in my tone. "There's a buyer who's been circling for months," he said. "Not just interested, hungry. They'd love to take a trophy property out from under her." "Make it happen," I said. The next 24 hours were a blur of signatures, wire transfers, and late-night calls. The deal closed faster than I thought possible, a perfect alignment of her arrogance and my timing. By the time I hung up with Armando the following evening, the building was no longer mine, but it was safely in the hands of her most aggressive competitor. I leaned back in the recliner, the faint pull of stitches at my neck, reminding me I was still healing. Outside, the sun had slipped below the rooftops, leaving only the glow of streetlights. Somewhere far south, Celine was still sipping cocktails, convinced her empire was waiting for her return. What she didn't know was that it now belonged to someone else entirely. They came back on a Tuesday afternoon, still wearing the sun on their skin, rolling glossy luggage up the boutique's sidewalk. I was parked across the street in my car, angled just enough to watch. Celine stopped first, her sunglasses sliding down the bridge of her nose. The bright orange eviction notice was impossible to miss, taped squarely in the center of the boutique's glass door. Corbin read it over her shoulder, his brow knotting lips moving as he scanned the legal language. Celine's mouth opened once closed, then opened again, but no words came out. The sparkle of vacation was already fading. I let them stew for an hour before sending the text, "Come to the house." Now, they showed up on my porch, Celine's heels clicking against the boards, Corbin hanging a step behind. I had the table set with 2 neat stacks of paper, the signed sale contract on the left, the lease clause on the right. I slid them forward. This I tapped. "The contract is the bill of sale for the building, closed while you were in Cabo. This I shifted to the lease clause, is where you agreed that a breach of transparency meant I could end your lease in 30 days. The underreported revenue, the unapproved renovations, the late rent, all documented." Corbin's mouth worked soundlessly before a splutter of half-formed protests came out. You can't just, I can," I said evenly. And I did. Celine's face drained of color. her eyes darting between the two stacks of paper, as if one might dissolve if she stared long enough. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked small, like the ground beneath her had shifted, and she was scrambling to find footing. Neither of them reached for the papers. I left them there on the table, the winter air curling between us. By the time they turned to go, the sound of Celine's heels was sharper, angrier, but the weight of what she'd lost followed her down the steps. I stayed seated, hands folded, already thinking about what came next. By spring, the transformation on Main Street was impossible to miss. The competitor who'd bought the building had turned Celine's old boutique into a thriving Hub Windows, dressed fresh every week, foot traffic spilling in and out the air inside, buzzing with energy. Meanwhile, Celine's relaunch had been reduced to a cramped unit in a tired strip mall by the highway, wedged between a nail salon and a payday loan office. The last time I drove past the parking lot was half empty. From the sales payout, I set aside what I needed for comfort, then used the rest for something I'd been dreaming about, quietly for years, the Literature and Life Center. We restored an old brick storefront in my own historic district, filling it with shelves of books, warm lamps, and long tables where seniors and teens could read, write, and talk without hurry. Some afternoons I'd sit in the back, listening to the murmur of voices and the gentle scrape of chairs against the wood floor, feeling the kind of fullness that no property deed alone could give. It was on one of those afternoons that Corbin appeared. No Celine, no rehearsed charm, just him, hands in his pockets, lingering by the door before making his way toward me. He didn't ask to sit. Instead, he held out a worn hardcover, its spine creased and familiar. "I thought you'd like this back," he said quietly. It was my father's copy of Leaves of Grass, the one I'd lent Corbin years ago and assumed was gone forever. I took it from his hands, feeling the weight of the pages, the memory of the man who'd given it to me. There was no apology, no explanation, just the book. I nodded once, setting it gently on the table beside me. Some endings aren't about reconciliation. They're about reclaiming your story piece by piece, even if some characters never learn the moral. And sitting there surrounded by the voices of people building their own chapters, I knew mine was exactly where it needed to be.